It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
I want to welcome to the program with Political Strategies. We have Mr. Josh Waters is with us. And Josh, how are you doing this morning?
Hey, Paul, I'm doing pretty good. Good morning.
Good morning. So let's talk a little bit about the Conduit for Action scorecard. I know that the first score, the first set of bills are out, the ones that CFA supports or opposes concerning what's going on with the 92nd General Assembly. Before we get to those, can we just talk about the purpose of this whole process and what it eventually leads to?
Yeah, so, Conduit for Action last session put out these weekly scorecards, tracking the bills, letting the public know, hey, these are the bills that are affecting your economic freedom in Arkansas. And then at the end of the session, Conduit for Commerce looked at those and chose, which ones they wanted to score in the final legislative scorecard that was issued ranking the legislators. So this will be used as a tool, these weekly scorecards, that Conduit for Commerce may use on scoring all these bills. But, basically what it is, Paul, is it's the economic freedom filter applied to the bills that are filed in the General Assembly this session.
And, of course, economic freedom filter doesn't grow government, doesn't increase dependency on government, doesn't spend money we do not have. Correct.
Right. And also, part of this is, that economic freedom filter, but also CFA will be scoring bills that are, lead to more transparency and more open and honest government, protecting free speech. Because if you don't have a transparent, open, and honest government, then it almost doesn't matter where we go from there, right?
Yeah.
And I know you've been talking about that. We can just have honest government first and then debate these policy issues. You got to have them kind of going together.
Yeah. Let's go ahead and get into it then. I mean, I know everyone wants to know, so let's go ahead and do the first three. These are three bills that Conduit for Action is scoring that Conduit for Action supports. Let's talk about SJR2.
Yeah, so SJR2 is a proposed constitutional amendment. So in each legislative session, that General Assembly will be able to refer out up to 3 proposed constitutional amendments. And in this one, this bill would actually work to end the idea and doctrine of sovereign immunity. And so if people think back to last year, there was a case that held that in Arkansas, under the Arkansas Constitution, Arkansas could not be a defendant in any of her courts, meaning the state, if they are ever sued, if a state agency or state actor is sued, they could claim sovereign immunity and try to get that lawsuit wiped out, effectively, getting rid of any potential lawsuit. And so I think a big area where this could come in, Paul, is the idea of an illegal exaction lawsuit. An illegal exaction lawsuit against the state is saying, hey, you illegally spent that money. And I know you had Joe McCutcheon and Matt Bishop on yesterday, and they filed some illegal exaction lawsuits. But the threat of a lawsuit is a huge incentive for the state to handle our money wisely, to stay within the confines of the Constitution, and to treat people fairly, regardless of any immutable characteristics. So, absent some type of constitutional amendment like this, the defense of sovereign immunity can and probably will be brought up by state actors anytime there's a lawsuit filed. And so I think this is a really good first step. It would basically say, hey, unless otherwise provided under the law, we have sovereign immunity. And so there are specific instances like an illegal exaction lawsuit or other causes of action that have been granted to the people under state statute. And those would be allowed to be enforced rather than the state coming in and saying, no, the Constitution says you cannot sue us. So it's really a great protection for the people and a huge incentive for the state to basically do the right thing.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. That was a very shocking decision. A lot of people were shell-shocked when basically they said the king can do no wrong. You can't sue because the government's the king, and that's not an environment at all that is going to lend itself to transparency. And you were right, Josh. The pressure, the possibility out there is a good thing. It's a deterrent. The possibility of a lawsuit, the possibility of being held accountable if you're the government doing something wrong to the people is, we have to have that out there. To not have that out there is just, it's going to make things even more corrupt. Let's go to the second bill this week of support. That'd be SB 118, Senate Bill 118, protecting free speech on college campuses. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so, I thought this was a really great bill. Basically what it comes down to is there is an attack, especially, it seems like, on conservative speakers and conservative messages on college campuses. So what this bill would do, Paul, is first it would, this idea of free speech zones. So these college campuses want to place people into zones. They want people to get prior permission to be there. And they kind of want to know what you're going to be talking about and get a permit ahead of time. So this bill really addresses the idea of, okay, a free speech zone is really trying to restrict my free speech and put it in certain confines. So it's going to try to say, okay, you can't have these free speech zones. It would also make sure that the campuses aren't suppressing any free speech, including ideas they might find. There's a long list, but some of them are if something's offensive, if something is jarring, if something is conservative, if something is liberal or otherwise objectionable. It says, the campus can't prohibit that speech. And so we all know we have a First Amendment right to free speech on college campuses. But this really goes even further and says we're going to protect that right, and these policies that these schools, they try to make up to get around that, aren't going to be allowed. One other thing, Paul, it does that I think pretty good is, I think a lot of people have heard about Ben Shapiro and some other conservative speakers. When they go to campus, the left tries to shout them down, right? They try to silence them through intimidation, through shouting them down. And so what a lot of these college campuses are doing is they're either A, making them pay huge, exorbitant security fees in anticipation of the left showing up and possibly becoming violent, and or they just shut down the events because they say, well, it's a security risk. And so it's putting into law, hey, you can't just use that as an out, basically. You can't just shut down these speakers because you don't like what they're going to possibly be talking about, and use this idea of a security fee as a reason to try to shut down free speech in which they don't like.
Yeah, that's a really good addition, and that's tempting to be left of bang because that's where they're going to go next to say, well, you're making things unsafe and that sort of thing. Kind of going to go Nancy Pelosi on them with the State of the Union address. Next up, SB 52, Mr. Josh Waters. No pensions for criminal government employees. This is another support. Go ahead. Tell us about this one.
Yeah, I know Senator Mark Johnson was on the show talking about this bill, and I hope everyone votes for this. I think it's a pretty clear idea that says, hey, if you're a public official, elected official, or public employee, and through your job as a public official, you take a bribe or you do engage in some other corruptive behavior that's a felony and you're convicted, you don't get all of your pension. You don't get your retirement benefit. And I think he spoke to a lot of wines out there. But, for example, State Senator John Woods is in prison for 18 years on corruption charges. As it stands today, he could probably come back and get any retirement benefits. And so I think this is a really good bill. It's an even stronger incentive for an open and honest government saying, hey, not only are you going to go to prison for 18 years, any money you're expecting in retirement benefits may not be there when you get back.
Yeah, I think that's common sense. And it's a pretty big deterrent because, government pensions are nice things to have. Okay, so to recap, those are the three bills out this week on the scorecard that Conduit for Action supports based on, again, the principles of does it grow government, does it increase dependency on government, or spend money we don't have. These are clearly all three really good bills. Let's go over to the opposed column. I think we've got two bills here to talk about, Josh. Let's start with HB 1060, adding continuing education requirements for HVAC licensees.
Yeah, so a straightforward bill, a short bill, and I'm pretty sure either the same or very similar to the bill Jeremy Hutchinson filed last session. So basically what this would do is it would add a continuing education requirement for people with heating, ventilation, air conditioning, refrigeration licenses. And so this is just one of those, I think, fundamental principles of being someone who's for limited government and someone who supports the free market. They wouldn't vote for this bill, Paul. And that's because this continuing education requirement it's a new regulation. And there may be some people in the field who even like, yeah, I think this is a good idea. But, Paul, that might actually be used as a sword to go against their competition. Say, hey, you didn't get your continuing education requirement. You don't even get a license anymore. This bill would require licensees to submit on their license renewal this continuing education requirement and show where they did it. So it's going to increase time for them to comply. It's going to increase costs. And as we know, those costs are always in some way passed on to the consumer, either through higher prices or less quality services. So this bill absolutely reduces economic freedom. It leans on government intervention instead of allowing the free market to operate.
Yeah, and I know I've talked to some people in the HVAC business, and they like this idea, some of them. I know the last person to unsuccessfully run a bill similar to this was Senator Jeremy Hutchinson. Is that right?
Yeah, he last session, bill almost exactly like this. It's not exact same language. Was filed and it did not pass. So I think it would be a very easy vote for a supermajority of Republicans to say, no, hey, the Republican Party platform says we're for limited government. And we support free markets. This bill doesn't do that. It's trying the government to come in.
Who's sponsoring this bill now?
So the sponsor of this bill is Representative Roger Lynch. He's a Republican from Lone Oak.
And what does he do for a living?
Oh, yes, that was something I didn't know this, Paul. When you go into the state legislative website, it has the employment section for the legislators, and under his employment section it says self-employed heating and air conditioning.
Okay.
And so he's right in this field, it looks like.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would assume then that he's going to – the reason he thinks this is necessary is for the public's safety, and the question is that true? I mean, the question is that what is everyone else going to think? Well, we need these more regulations because of the public safety. It kind of goes to what we've talked about a long time here. So often these regulations are not about the public safety. They're about making it harder for other people to get into the business in the first place. And that's just not good. And it goes, like you said, Josh, it goes back to the free market. Moving on to the next item, the last item, HB 1002, the new internet sales tax. Conduit for Action opposes this. Talk a little bit about this. We've going to rehash some arguments from 2 years ago, I'm sure.
Yep, the internet sales tax bill is back. This is a standalone bill that was filed, I think, the first or second day of pre-filing by State Representative Dan Douglas. And it tracks along with Senate Bill 140 of 2017. Now, last session, Paul, a big argument was the fact that even the idea of an internet sales tax was clearly unconstitutional. Since then, the U.S. Supreme Court said, well, under certain conditions, if it's not, too much of an undue burden, and you structure it the right way, maybe you can have it. But even then, Paul, this is an optional tax increase. Just because the Supreme Court says you can do something, like with the Medicaid expansion program, doesn't mean you have to go out and raise taxes. There's a long article in the newspaper this morning, and it was really striking because they're talking about a lot of different tax reform proposals that may come up this session. And by the end of it, Paul, I was thinking some of the legislators were suffering from tax identity disorder. They couldn't tell the difference between what a tax increase was or a tax cut was, and in some cases they were interpreting what they thought a tax increase was to be a tax cut. It was just kind of mind-blowing. So to put any, confusion out there, the internet sales tax is a tax increase on the people, not on out-of-state sellers. The people pay it, and it will grow government at all levels, the state, county, and city level. That's what the internet sales tax does. It says, hey, we're sucking more people out of the pockets of Arkansans, and we're putting it into government coffers. And then, the legislators and the people will have to decide if they want to do that. I don't know maybe outside of Dan Douglas, many people who ran on saying, yes, let's do that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, who out there ran on passing an internet sales tax? Maybe some, but not a lot. And, Dan Douglas doesn't exactly have a mandate either. He got by his primary by what, 1 vote? Something like that?
Yeah. I
Was
think it was 12. But
12 votes? Oh, okay.
That's about as close as it can get.
What a huge mandate to go ahead and continue the passing the internet sales tax. And you're right, Josh. This is a tax that, this is going to increase the authority of the state of Arkansas to outside the state of Arkansas. I mean, that's the strange part. But when you say it's a tax on the people, what you're meaning is those businesses outside of the state are going to pass on that tax to us. They're just going to raise their prices. And so we're going to have less money.
Well, it's actually not even so much that fault. It's a sales tax. It's a direct tax paid by the people. So whatever the percentage is for their, between their state, county, and city. So
you're saying you're saying that this particular bill is not a tax on out-of-state sellers. It is an actual sales tax that is going to get added to our purchase at checkout on the internet.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And they try to say, well, it's a tax on out-of-state sellers because they're the ones collecting and remitting. But that's just not the case. The people of Arkansas pay the tax. It's just collected and remitted on the company where the purchase is made, and so it's an increased compliance cost for them. But the people of Arkansas pay that sales tax.
Wow. Well, and you know what? That's going to be the key. Is to get that information out there. I did see in the Gazette this morning they were saying that the internet sales tax may be packaged with and combined with the income tax reductions, which means you're going to put your legislators between a rock and a hard place, which is, are you going to vote against income tax reduction because you don't support the internet tax? Or are you going to vote, for the internet tax, but you also vote for income tax reduction? Even though, the bottom line is this. If you give the government more avenues, more tributaries to fund itself, it continues to grow. The only way to stop government from growth is to limit how they get their money. Period. So,
yeah. At the end of the day, is government getting more or less money because they passed a bill? That's how a tax increase is defined.
Yeah.
Whether it's referred out, whether it's, mixed in with some tax cuts, at the end of the day, you put it all together, and there's going to be less money in people's pockets and more going to the government because of a change in law.
Yeah.
Then that's a tax increase.
I would feel better, and maybe I wouldn't, but it would be nice with all of this said and done, that we have a commitment from the people in power that there will not be a net tax increase. I get opposed to the internet sales tax. I'm opposed to it too. But what I mean is when it's all said and done, when all the chips, when you've done whatever tax reform you're going to do, you've tweaked this, you've raised that, it would be nice if we could get somebody on record to say there will not be a net tax increase on the people, that when it's all said and done, we will be either paying the same or less, hopefully significantly less. I would really like that. I think what I saw in the Gazette this morning were people saying, well, I would vote for the internet sales tax and income tax reduction because it would be a net tax decrease with just those two. But that's just those two issues. That's not taking into consideration the totality of what's it going to be in April. When everything's said and done in April, what we're going to add up the math and what's the math going to look like. And I really think, just for the sake of unity, people should just own whatever it is they do, and let's just stop with the well, if you look at it this way, technically, the numbers shouldn't lie, and we don't need to be reaching backwards, we don't need to be legislatively plagiarizing and reaching backwards to what's already been done, which I think is what they may do when it comes to their numbers. But Josh Waters, I'll give you the last word, sir, and we got to go.
Yeah, I just encourage people to, continue to check out conduitforaction.org, and they can text the word JOIN to 501-292-2683, and they'll get a text with this weekly scorecard every week. So.
All right. Fantastic. Josh Waters, we appreciate it, sir. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, folks, got to take a break. Back in a minute.